All right, so today's a bonus session. We usually have our sessions on Wednesday, and our interview today is so good. He is so amazing that we're doing a bonus session on a Friday to get him in. Dr. Keith Witt is a licensed psychotherapist, teacher, author who's lived and worked in Santa Barbara since 1973. He's conducted over 70,000 therapy sessions. He's published 8 books, including Loving Completely, Shadow Light, and Integral Mindfulness. His books, Waking Up and Sessions, were the 2 first books on integral informed psychotherapy. His presentations and classes around the US and internationally, Keith explores love, therapy, interpersonal relationships, and development from a multitude of sources, weaving neuroscience, integral theory, wisdom traditions, numerous forms of psychotherapy into a cosmology of love and healing. Keith is an amazing spiritual soul. If you just look at his face, he is pure light. So I am very excited to introduce him to you today and to be a part of this conversation. I could literally talk to Keith for hours. He's one of the smartest. He's just a fabulous individual. So I'm really excited. Keith, thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so let's talk about your journey, okay? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how you got here, what your purpose is. Where do you want to start with that?
Well, I'm a function of, just like all of us, I'm a function of my age, the world that I've been raised in. In spiral dynamics, they say that life conditions create worldview, and that's true. And so I'm 73. And so to those of us who were come of age in the 50s and the 60s, that was a little bit like the axial period, 600 BC. There was a huge shift in the culture. And the postmoderns, the pluralistic people developed in that time, and there was huge social shifts. And we can see the evidence of it, the hippies and the anti-war movement and so on. But from a consciousness level, there was a major shift into being world-centric. There was a major shift into trying to bring spirituality back into the world, which was flat, had denied spirituality, including psychology had. So that's where I came of age. And, when I was around 12 or 13, I looked at this world and I was just despairing, and my family was in problems and so on. So I started developing symptoms, and I was a difficult teenager, and my parents wisely got into psychotherapy. And at that point, I had a frankly psychotic depression. And my mother was an alcoholic, borderline personality disorder. And the therapist realized he had to get one of my mom or me. I had 2 brothers out of the system, and they chose me. And so my parents committed me to a hospital when I was 15 and gave me 23 electroconvulsive treatments. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's a pretty amazing thing. They strap you to a table and they put muscle relaxants in you, and they run a current, and you have grand mal seizure, and it changes you. And for me at 15, in a way, my unconscious was demanding a death and a rebirth. And I got it that weekend, those 5-6 weeks when they were doing that, and decided there that I was going to be a warrior and a healer, because a warrior and a healer were the only archetypes that attracted me in 1965. And so I started studying psychology and martial arts. And in 1969, I got my black belt in karate. In 1975, I had my first license. And then I began to recognize that I wanted to serve. I wanted to do psychotherapy. I wanted to teach psychotherapy. I wanted to write about it. And I had a sense that even then in my 20s, that there was something larger that psychotherapy was serving. And then later on, many years later, when I discovered David Data and Ken Wilber and so on, I realized that unconsciously I wanted to serve the evolution of consciousness. That I could feel how the world's changing, how the consciousness, the fields of consciousness in this world are going through into a transformative process, to the point where now, for instance, just look at the ecology. Right now, we are nature. The biosphere on this planet is going to go the way you and I decide to make it go. So we're not just in nature. We are nature. We're nature's hands and feet and consciousness. And more people are waking up to that. Now, this makes me very hopeful, but also it's informed my work, because you cannot do psychotherapy without that background hum of, yeah, if we don't have an interface between our own spiritual imperatives and our own authenticity and our own moral foundations and the world at large, if that doesn't happen, then everything's going to get really a lot worse before it gets better. And to truly be healthy people, we need to address all of those. And modern psychotherapy is beginning to see that. There was a long period where I didn't really see it. I was an outlier. And when I began to get re-involved in psychotherapy as in the more mainstream psychotherapy in the late 90s. And I, to my delight, was seeing practitioners who were agreeing with these things and bringing that stuff into their work. And I just felt hungry to share the perspectives that were emerging from this with me, the psychotherapy systems, the literally the cosmology of development and psychopathology and help and so on. And I had to share it. Ken Wilber once told me, to the extent that you understand the secrets of the universe and don't share them, you suffer. And I was suffering. And so I started writing books and giving lectures and doing workshops, and in addition to my psychotherapy. And that leads us to the present moment.
So talk to me about what you found through martial arts and therapy that made a difference in your life.
Well, first of all, if you look back into the 60s, one of the things that drove the counterculture, we called it the counterculture. And that was, if you think about that phrase, that's a hostile phrase. That was in opposition of the mainstream culture. We weren't defining ourselves as an evolutionary step forward. We were denying that culture, which created a lot of psychopathology, a lot of narcissism. Okay. But the reason we did that is we saw so much inauthenticity, so much hypocrisy, so much bullshit. It was astounding. As I'm a visual, there's different kinds of thinking. There's visual objective thinking, there's verbal thinking, and there's visual spatial thinkers. I'm a visual spatial thinker, where systems come together and take forms for me. And I didn't like the forms that were emerging. So I wanted something that was substantive. Now, martial arts was substantive. If you ever go into a martial arts studio, the practitioners by watching them practice. It's straightforward. And when you get to the higher levels of practice, the differences are spiritual. Everybody knows the same techniques. Everybody does the same training, but certain people have stronger spirits. And even though I didn't know it, I entered a traditional Japanese studio. We were doing zazen before and after every session. They didn't call it that. I realized it was zazen until years later. So there was something real about that, something authentic that captured me. I went, there's some power here. The power of the warrior is not about fighting, I discovered. The power of the warrior is about you're willing to stand up for your principles in the face of sacrifice and opposition. You're willing to do what's right, even though there are consequences. You're willing to go for what's substantive and true rather than what conforms. And when I started studying psychotherapy in the 70s, that particular element was missing. The people that were kind of trying to be strong were kind of being cruel. Fritz Perls is a good example of that. And so that power, there was power, but that was kind of corrupted. And then there were other people that kind of denied the warrior energy and denied the fact that we have to have the strong masculine and the strong feminine in each one of us and between us. And so I felt I had something to contribute to that as in the 70s and began to. I started some counseling centers with people. One of my partners, when I left and went into private practice, he went and started Pacifica. We were doing classes and that kind of stuff. And so that blend, of feeling spirit coming through you into the moment, but also going with what social sciences taught us about what helps people grow. Uh, we take for granted the amount of social research that's been done in the last 50 years. In the 70s, nobody knew anything about anything. Everybody was just speculating and starting their system. And we had, George Bach saying couples want to hit each other with batakas. And we had, Janov saying primal scream will get you there. Just scream and scream and scream and hate mommy and hate, this stuff was all over the place. I went to a humanistic psychology conference in, I don't know, 1977, something. And one of the first workshops was teaching people how to pick each other up and have anonymous sex at the workshop. I mean, it was just over the top crazy. But out of all that richness came legitimate people like today with the psychedelic research who said, look, okay, let's start doing the research about this stuff. Let's find out what science tells us about, say, love, tells us about health, tells us about all kinds of things. And there was one study once that said the amount of data, the amount of information in the world doubled between the years 2011 2014. Now think about that for a second. Everything that had been generated and recorded up to 2011 was doubled in the next 3 years. The number of journals doubled every year for years. Now, I was following this research. Some of it was bogus. I found out later. Everything funded by drug companies was bogus, which is a whole nother thing. Every time I start thinking that I'm an enlightened person, I start thinking about my attitude towards drug companies. I go, Keith, you have miles to go. Because, I have to like struggle to have compassionate understanding of corporations that are ripping people off for money and, keeping us all sick so that they can extract from us. You can see, you can just hear it. So now compassionate understanding helps me with that, but I have to struggle for it. But there was legitimate research being done. John Gottman has done just magnificent research. I go on and on and on. What I found is that in general, these studies cumulatively were presenting basically a coherent cosmology of how people grow and develop. And when you take integral studies and you add it to that, you have something that gives you a sense of from the inside of understanding the universe from the beginning to the end, and understanding yourself from the beginning to the end, and understanding how we're always in relationship with ourselves and with spirit and with all the different parts of ourselves. And that when those relationships are in harmony, what we're feeling is love. And that love heals the world, heals our relationships, heals our bodies. It's quite beautiful. And good therapists all draw from this well. And so it was so large, I couldn't write one book about it. I had to take one aspect of it and then focus on that. And then, okay, I got that down. Now I went to the next one, and now they went to the next one. And the last one was my book on trauma. And at least for me, I've written 16 books, but I've published 9 or 10 now, counting when I publish Trauma into Transcendence on my website. That's going to be available on my website in a couple of months. All that together basically reflected a particular cosmology that wasn't just about psychotherapy and healing, though. It was primarily about that because that's what has motivated me throughout my life. It's about being human. It's about our responsibilities as human. It's about the intense relational nature of us. We're the only ultra-social primate species. So we're more like ants and bees than we are like the other primates. We really are. And what's a beehive? A beehive is a factory inside a fortress. What have people been doing the last 10,000 years? They've been creating fortresses with, Now, the only difference, though, is that bees don't have to choose to be part of the collective and to be part of creating something larger than themselves. They have to do it. We flicker in and out. We are separate from everybody else, depending upon our consciousness, are connected to everybody else. And we have to decide to be connected. And when we do, we can create miracles. But we also can decide to be separate. And when we do, we create our own individual hell. And we can create beautiful things like democracy is a beautiful thing. And we can create horrific things like fascism, mass formation psychosis. So humans have these capacities to be so much better than anything else and so much worse than anything else. And as each individual, we each individually have those capacities, those superpowers. And my job is to help people develop their superpowers and use them for love rather than for anger and fear and defense and so on. And that's motivated me throughout my entire life since since I was 15 years old.
So how do you define love? How do you explain to people what your definition or what your experience of love is?
Uh, love is like enlightenment. You know, people have written like millions of pages about both of those things. And, nobody really knows. I have my own definition that works for me that kind of started with David Data. David Data was really useful in that when I was certified as a sex therapist, was one of the things that I do in 1979, I think. But I just didn't feel like the field was really was addressing how people related as lovers. I really didn't think so. It was too much into functionality, where you can have an erection, orgasm, that kind of stuff. And so I kind of detached from that. And then later on, when I discovered Data talked about the spiritual connectedness, the polarity, the energetic polarities that happen between lovers and between the masculine and feminine. And I went, yeah, okay. And one thing that he said that I agree with is that love is being at one with. Now, this fits if you think about to spiritual practice, particularly nature mysticism. Nature mysticism is God in the third person, very much like Vajrayana Buddhism, where you find God in everything. But what does that mean? Well, that means that if I look out the window, I'm in my office, I'm looking out the window, and there's a lot of flowers. And if I look at the flowers and I connect with them, I feel at one with them. I'm loving them. So love is being at one with. As I look at you guys and I feel connected, there's an energetic field that we have at this moment, all of us. And I feel at one with that field. That's love. Now, there's different flavors. There's 1,000 different flavors of love. And each loving relationship has its own demands, its own conditions. I've written about this. I think that unconditional love is generally a myth. I think the closest we get to unconditional love is how we are programmed to deal with infants. Most of us will feel a sense of unconditional love holding an infant. That's a genetic imperative. That's baked into us. And of course it is. How could it not be? Particularly because human children have the longest period of all mammals where they're dependent. And there's just all kinds of interesting social phenomena associated with that. For instance, divorce happens most around the 4th year of relationship. Why would that be? Well, if a couple falls in love, which people will have this romantic infatuation the first 9 to 18 months, and they have sex all the time, somebody gets pregnant. After 4 years, the child is about 3.5 years old, if a child's born, and that child can now be a functional member of a tribe. Okay? And so divorce happens. Interestingly, the more children people have, less likely they are to divorce. Why is that? Because there's more of a sense of felt responsibility to protect, care for, and love and share as partners. Why are we the only primate species that has a pair bond? Because when we came down out of the trees, there needed to be one guy protecting a woman and a child with his life because she couldn't pick that kid up and jump into a tree anymore, like chimpanzees can. That pair bond is the center of social relationships that spread out into tribes, which regulated us in many ways for millions of years. Tribes regulate aggression, for instance. Tribes regulate dominance. in ways that, and we had those capacities, got them from our chimpanzee ancestors, but they were regulated. But agrarian society comes, we start having cities. Now we have the capacity for men to take charge of everything, and patriarchy showed up. We know what happened. A lot of great things, but it wasn't great for women. And that's beginning to change now, starting with the 60s. And there's now this transformation of consciousness that's happening around the world. I call it an integral awakening for various reasons. Now, you notice we started talking about love, and I'm talking about the integral awakening. Why? Because that sense of that oneness is what drives everything. Okay? That when we develop as human beings, what marks our development is a wider embrace. Well, first it's just me, then it's me and my family, and then it's me and my group, and then it's me and my city, and then it's me and my country, and then it's me and all humanity, and then it's me and all life, and then maybe it's me and the universe. Okay? Certainly that mirrors spiritual practice got in the first person, the contemplative practices, where the end state, when you have samadhi experiences, are basically feeling one with everything. Basically, I am love, and love is everything. Now, those of us that have done these practices have had that experience. That's an interior experience. It's unqualifiable. But if you've had that experience, you know what I'm talking about. You've had your version of it. And I'm sure your version is somewhat different than mine, but not that much. I imagine that if you've had an experience of non-dual unity, that I pretty much know what you're talking about because I've had those experiences and do regularly. And all that is love. Now, let's be more granular about this. In terms of happiness, the research shows that the number one thing that people associate with happiness is a great relationship. Okay? First of all, it's a primary relationship. And second of all, it's a relationship with friends and family. So again and again, Chicago every 4 years asks a bunch, sends out these surveys. And they ask people what makes them happy. And there's 5 things that always show up, but that's always number one. And that's a big deal. And happiness is important to pay attention to because happiness is our unconscious votes with our states. And so, I'm really happy. My wife and I have been together since 1973. We lucked into each other in 1973 and have been growing together ever since. Part of a lot of it's work, but part of it was just dumb luck that we both chose somebody who liked to grow. And as that's happened over time, there's been more and more joy in my life associated with her. Okay. And I know the promise of modern intimacy because I'm experiencing it. That relationship, if you can take that pair bond and expand that friendship and that love affair and that capacity to solve problems, and if you can do that throughout a lifetime, that's a quality of love that's unqualifiable and is the purest love I've ever discovered, most powerful, most potent one that I've ever discovered. That's a really big deal. And it's important to all of us because we're all wired for a paired bond. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have that with various people. I've known people to have, and this is true for me too, to have a series of relationships where they grew through each one and then up-leveled the next one. But if people keep doing that, at some point they get a life partner, and then what ends that relationship is somebody dies. Okay. I knew that was happening with me when I stopped worrying about whether Becky was the right person to start worrying about whether she was going to die first. When that happened, whoa, that's a different consciousness. But by the way, that's not the only thing associated with happiness, but that's the number one thing. After that is friends, connections, because we're an ultra social species. Having a sense of spiritual connectedness is associated with it. Having a sense of personal liberation is associated with happiness. Having a sense of a shared spiritual understanding with a community is a source of happiness. All those things creating that sense of subjective happiness, that's our unconscious saying, that's what I want. And we don't have any of those by ourselves. And we don't have any of those without having some kind of relationship with our own unconscious, our own past, present, and future. And it's very difficult to be human. Developing as a human, because of I wrote a book called The Gift of Shame once. The reason why I wrote that book is that shame is, I was sick of therapists just dumping on shame. Shame this and shame that and toxic shame and blah, blah, shame. Okay. And well, how come that we have this affect, this huge affect, shame, just like moral disgust? It obviously has a purpose. So if you look into developmental psychology, that's what makes us able to be social. Because what happens around 10 or 11 months? Kids don't blush before 10 months. There's not enough separate self to be embarrassed. 11, 10, 11, 12 months, they start feeling separate from mom. They can walk, they can get around. And if somebody looks at a kid and says, stop it or no, they'll feel shame. They'll blush, they'll look down, they'll freeze. Weakness will go through their chest. It's a way that a mother can control a child 20 or 30 feet away. They're just going to a stake, stop. The kid looks at mom like she's a stranger, but he freezes. And a little bit of social learning takes place. Well, around 2 years old, when a kid has the theory of mind, they can observe themselves. They observe themselves breaking a social rule and they'll feel a little shame. All right, this is a huge part of what motivates us to be pro-social beings. Now, of course, the problem with that is that we develop these defenses where we start internalizing standards that are primitive standards that only a little kid can understand. And then all of a sudden, we're 35 years old and we step on a crack and we feel a sense of shame because I'm going to break my mother's back. Okay. That our moral systems need to be up-leveled as we grow. And if they don't, those old moral standards, they'll intrude and they'll hurt us. 5 to 10, a child is a conformist. They'll just believe what's right and wrong because of what people tell them. Okay. So if you tell a kid, if you feel sexual, you're bad, that kid is now wired. When they have a sexual feeling, they will feel bad, like God doesn't care for them. That's an impossible dynamic. And whether we're religious or not, we all have those. Those moral standards need to be up-leveled, not denied. Okay. I mean, if I was going to think in terms of spirituality and sexuality, which I am right now, spirituality wants me to have healthy, vibrant, pro-social sexuality, and doesn't want me to have destructive, exploitative sexuality. Okay, so I should feel ashamed if I start being destructive or exploitative or self-destructive even. But I should feel virtuous if I'm engaged in sexuality that's creating love and joy and health. Okay, now what I just did is I just modeled up-leveling that particular value. And that's what our values they need to become refined as we grow. That requires consciousness. That requires self-awareness. That requires understanding that our moral authority in our own heart needs to trump all other moral authorities, and that there's always another level of moral understanding for us to reach for, just like there's always another level of intimacy. There's always another level of wisdom. Then this is the gift that Integral gave to me. Integral said, we grow through stages and there's always stages beyond. Because before I discovered that, I felt like, no, I really want to be at the top. I was kind of arrogant, egocentric. I have a lot of gifts. And when you have a lot of gifts, you tend to get arrogant and think, you're the best and everything, which was a blind spot and caused me a lot of problems. And, so that creates humiliating experiences, which then become humbling experiences, which help you grow. And so Integral liberated me from that by going, wherever stage I'm at, no matter how well I'm understanding things, there's a better understanding farther on. No matter how well I'm helping somebody, I can probably help better later. No matter how well I'm loving and receiving love, I can probably do that better. I can probably get better at all that stuff till I die. No matter how connected to spirit I am, there's still another level of connectedness beyond that I can have flashes of, but they're not stable in my life. And if you think about it, if you have a spiritual practice, there are things that you do spiritually now that are ordinary daily experiences that were extraordinary experiences a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But now I occasionally have an extraordinary experience. I go, will that be an ordinary experience for me in 5 or 10 years? I don't know. I hope so. But that's how we grow. And as we grow, we're growing more connected. We're never growing more separated.
So can we talk about one of the things you said to me that I will never forget is the role of others to be our external nervous system.
Uh,
And I love that, and I use that every day. So, and you know, we're developing this spiritual online community. So can you talk to us about the role that others people have as our external nervous system?
yeah. Um, so first of all, it's useful to think in terms of, well, we have our own individual self and our own individual nervous system, but we're also part of a larger nervous system of everybody we're connected with. Like right now, I can see you guys, your pictures of you in the thing. So we're connected. And I can see your faces enough. If I can register your faces, then there's a mirror neuron thing happening where we're kind of sharing states of consciousness. And you're sharing my states of consciousness. Now, I feel a lot of joy when I talk about this stuff. So you're probably feeling a little bit of my joy and feeling a little bit of your own as you do this. This is how our nervous systems mingle. Okay, so we also, all of us have blind spots where we can't observe ourselves very well. Okay? But other people will react to us. Um, uh, I'm smiling because I was working with a couple this week. Now, this guy, he's kind of an obsessive compulsive personality disorder type guy. He'll get caught up in his project and what's right. And then somebody will push against it. And he'll go, no, no, we got to do it this way. And so, no, we got to do it this way. All right. So to the person on the other side, he just became a jerk. And he's just self-righteously pumping his thing. He came in with a woman who's they're in love and they've been together a couple of years, and she's very socially sensitive. And so I said, look, when you do that, and all of a sudden you feel that feeling of self-righteousness, you stop socially referencing. You're cut off socially from other people, and you're going to piss them all off. And you're pissing her off right now doing it. And so, and she said, well, I said, what do you do when he does it? She said, well, I just kind of shut up and let him go on. I go, no, don't do that. You need to tell him you're doing it. And then when she says that, you need to say, oh, I'm sorry, and recognize you've shifted from getting the thing done and being a jerk into, oh, I just offended you. I'm sorry. Let me socially reference. How's this? And he said, I can do that. And I go, yeah, I know you can, but can you do it every time? Can you do it when you're not in my office? Because if you can't, that's gonna create separation in this relationship. But if you can, if she says, oh, you're doing it, you go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing it. I made the project more important than us just now. Yeah, you did. Well, I'm sorry. Okay. If you do that, you become her hero. You get so attractive when you do that. He said, yeah, that's interesting. I kind of did that in the kitchen on Monday. And then Tuesday morning, we had the greatest sex. I said, yeah. This is why one woman told me once, she said, the best foreplay he can do is do the dishes. Now, it wasn't because he's doing the dishes that made him sexy. It's because he was doing the dishes because she was tired and he wanted to help, and she felt he was connected and socially referencing her, and that was more important than other things. And so when that happens and we allow ourselves to let that in, and instead of defending against it or pushing against it, we go, I wonder what that says about me. And you make that shift when someone's offering caring influence. Okay. Caring influence is not the same as hostile influence. Okay. Hostile influence is entirely a different thing. Caring influence, to receive it and allow yourself to become essentially to surrender. Okay. If you know better about how to be in this moment than I do, I should submit to that. And as that's a power, that's a superpower to be able to do it, particularly if you're a strong person. Now, I'm a strong person, but if somebody knows better than me, my job is to submit to that until we're in harmony. And then I know what harmony feels like. Now, here's where this is difficult. When we're threatened, we enter defensive states. Our unconscious, our shadow self, generates a state to protect us. And that state, there's a lot of different kinds, but they have the same characteristics. There's amplified or numbed emotions. There's distorted perspectives. There's a negative story. There's destructive impulses. And your capacity for empathy and self-reflection have been compromised. Those 5 things happen. So someone comes up to me and says, I can't remember when this happened. Uh, I kind of live a therapy monastic life, so I don't have many people giving me shit at this stage of my life. But if somebody is hostile, then I'll have alarm and anger. I'll have a distorted story about them being a bad person. You notice when we get upset about people, we'll reduce them to their negative characteristic. Okay, that's a distorted perspective. I'll have a destructive impulse to fight or flight or flee. I will have less capacity for self-reflection, to notice that I'm distorting and that I'm amplifying, and I'll have less capacity for empathy. This person would not be threatening unless they were distressed. Okay. Now, if I know about those things, I can feel that happening. I can go, wait a minute. First of all, what's a more compassionate story? And what's distressing this person? You know, what's upsetting you that you're in my face? You know. Now, let's talk about doing that with a couple. Couples will go, threat, I'm threatened. Now I attack you, you're threatened, you attack me. We have an escalating conflict. This is what causes lots of problems with couples. It's either actively done, blah, 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 or it's passively done. I'm going to ignore you, you're going to ignore me, we separate. And basically, that's how relationships deteriorate. But what if one person does that and you take the shot? Boy, that hurt. And you go, wow, you must be upset. Is there something that I just did that hurt you? You know, I don't want to hurt you. Now, you're not cooperating with that pattern, that defensive pattern. That pattern wants to enact itself. You attack me, I attack you. Okay, there's urgency. You know, that's how people are wired. And by the way, that was an evolutionary milestone. Okay, in a tribe, you threaten me and I threaten you. We go back and forth psychologically until somebody submits. That maintains social cohesion in the tribe. And the tribe will have customs about how to handle that. And it will have a shaman or somebody or a leader that you go to if you can't resolve something. Customs that deal with that. And so that dominant submission thing works because a lot of psychological dominant submission happens before people start hurting each other physically. And it's interesting that when guys get super pissed, they want to go off by themselves. And when women get super pissed, they want to go find a woman and talk to her about it. And if you think about a tribe, that would be that in a tribe, that would protect the tribe. The women would find other women so that it's hard to abuse somebody in front of somebody else. Guys would go off before they injured an important member of the tribe. Okay, that dominant submission thing, defensive state, again, was an evolutionary milestone. But let's fast forward. We can do better than that. We can go farther. We can feel that happening and say, no, let's do something different. Let's have compassionate understanding, find a step forward, and then feel love for each other. Let's get more safe with each other as a result of one of us entering a defensive state. Okay? Now that means we need to have a relationship with our own unconscious, with our shadow self, which is, you know, always giving us information and data and stories and stuff that we need to monitor. You know, none of us are in the present moment. We're all about a half second to a second and a half behind our unconscious, our adaptive unconscious, our shadow self that's responding to the environment and giving us stories and impulses and working memory and all that other stuff. Okay. And so we're kind of riding on that unconscious that cooperates with us or doesn't, depending upon how secure we feel. So it's complicated, it's challenging, but you know, that's being a human being. And as we get better at that, we don't just get better at being at one with other people, loving them and being loved. We get better at being one with ourselves because we have a past, present, and future inside of us. We have autobiographical narratives. It's the switching centers for those who are in the right hemisphere. And those autobiographical narratives are us as human and us as lover and us as friend and us as worker and us as whatever. And those narratives are always alive. They're always changing. And some of those are, I'm not a very good person. I don't do it well enough. You know, those motivation programs that we absorbed as kids when we had immature consciousness, when it looked like, you know, mom was never satisfied. So you go, I'm never satisfied with myself. When it looked like dad said, you know, you're crazy. And you go, well, I guess I'm crazy. You know, that kind of stuff. So those narratives can be changed and are changed if we have a relationship, love, a sense of at oneness with our past, present, and future. And if you look at a lot of the new reconsolidation therapies, EMDRs, rap, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's movements that use rhythmic movements to activate the thalamus and the hippocampus to bring up old states and memories and reconsolidate them in a more modern fashion, where they're less distressing and there's more wisdom associated with them. Basically, all those therapies are helping people grow their autobiographical narratives so that they begin to understand this seminal thing. Well, all of us are the heroes in our own hero's journey. All of us. All of us are living in a universe that is defined by our decisions. And we're always on that journey. And there's a lot of them. There's big ones and there's little ones. But if we keep deciding to do right, more and more and more we reconcile the interior conflicts. More and more we feel like, something is expanding in me. A reconciliation, as Joseph Campbell said, with the masculine and the feminine, with the father and the mother, with the dark and the light. And we'll feel transformed by that. And when that happens, an interesting thing happens with people. They want to give it to other people. They want to come back and share it. When they have something that's important to them, they want to use it to serve other people. That's what Ken Wilber told me. To the extent you understand the secrets of the universe and don't share them, you suffer. Because I was talking to him, why do I feel so urgent about writing these books? He said, well, this is why. And this is getting back to your original question about love. Okay? Evolution is not random. Evolution is leading us forward, and each step along has deeper consciousness and more compassion, essentially more unity. Evolution is leading us to more love. And we are at the crest of the evolutionary wave. And as we progress, we feel more deeper consciousness and more compassion. We feel more love. Evolution is biased to creating love. And that's why my current passion is supporting the evolution of consciousness. Because there's something, and not just because that'll save the biosphere, which is important. I mean, I really do want I want the Earth to be the equivalent of a climax forest. So we get a sustainable, everything's going great. Climax forests can go forever until somebody comes and cuts it down. Thank you, Bolsonaro in Brazil. So I have some friends in Brazil. That guy drives them crazy. But that's not the bottom line. There's something mystical beyond that about consciousness. I don't know what it is, but I know it's beautiful. And I know that it's something that I want to help. That's my work. That's why I'm having this conversation with you guys.
So let's talk about your latest book.
Sure.
From trauma to transcendence, right? Transcendence. Mm-hmm. So, and the 4 stages of trauma. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, the 4 stages of trauma work. I had written a lot about trauma before in my book on integral psychotherapy, Waking Up, and in this companion volume, Sessions. But trauma is a big deal these days. And also an awful lot of research has been done on the neurobiology of trauma in the last 30 years. And I've studied a lot of the systems, and there's a lot of great systems for helping people with trauma. But one thing that wasn't being talked about is that if you're working on trauma, there's certain understandings that were not being widely talked about in the field. For instance, trauma learning. If it's causing a problem, it's a form of memory, just like resilience is a form of memory. So here's an example of resilience. Resilience is I'm driving down the street, and somebody goes through a stop sign, almost runs into me, and I have to honk so that they don't run into me, and then they take off. And I go, whoa, that was close. And I'm not upset. Right? Now, that's resilience. Why? I have a series of memories of Keith, first of all, honking a lot, screaming, fuck you, and all this other stuff. Okay, that didn't really help. Okay, so that got changed into somebody just did something dangerous, and I need to let them know they're doing something dangerous. That's why I honk. And also, I drive like everybody's going to do that. So somebody does it, I'm not surprised. They're just doing what I always expect everybody to do in a car, which is kill me. Okay. And so I drive on and I'm not upset. Right? Okay, that's being resilient. Right? That's a memory system that has been developed over time. Trauma is the exact opposite. Trauma is when you get sensitized and it requires less and less of a stimulus to create more and more of an alarm reaction. And so, say I just scream and shout every time somebody does something bad in a car, and I keep screaming and shouting. And after a while, somebody doesn't turn their turn signals on, and I'm honking my horn because they're not doing their turn signals and yelling at them. I've gotten super upset with a little stimulus. Okay, that is being sensitized. It's a memory system. So the first thing is understanding trauma as a memory system. That where we've become sensitized rather than resilient. Okay, so that understanding itself is a huge, important understanding that is just not generally known in the field. And there's different kinds of memory, and I could go into it, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. That's just one thing. The other thing is that if somebody is upset enough by having been traumatized, either a lot of little T traumas where you just feel crappy all the time, and say you were bullied as a kid, or a big T trauma, you were assaulted or you had a car wreck or something, and now you're having symptoms or post-traumatic stuff. The first thing is you go and you ask somebody to help. Now, remember, we're ultra social people, creatures. So you ask somebody to help, like a therapist. So the first thing that you do when you notice that you have trauma learning is say, well, you acknowledge it, you go talk to somebody. And so anybody who's worked with people who've been traumatized, all therapists have, first thing you do is you just keep talking about it until they can tell you the story. Okay? And you take as long time as you want. Now, sometimes you'll do work, you'll do EMDR, you'll have them journal. There's reconsolidation techniques that you can do. You teach people how to calm themselves down as they're telling the story, like touch for health, this stuff, tapping, deep breath, meditative techniques. But the bottom line is you keep talking until you can tell the story without being lost in the story. Now, Sigmund Freud wrote a paper with, I think, Brewer back in the late, maybe 1890, where he thought that was enough. If you're able to tell a story and not get upset, then you've resolved the trauma. Well, that's just absolutely not true a lot of the time. But that's the first stage. Okay, so that's the first stage of trauma work. But say you still feel bad. Say you still feel ashamed about being assaulted or being molested when you were a kid, or being bullied or whatever it is. Well, then you go to the next stage. And the next stage is looking at your life story, looking at the story that I have about me. And, earlier I was talking about the hero's journey. I love the hero's journey. My therapist gave me Hero with 1,000 Faces when I was 19 years old, and it changed my life. And I've been teaching about the hero's journey ever since. And so you need to go back into your own story of yourself and understand how that trauma was part of the road of trials. That was an ordeal that the world gave you that now you need to face and move through. And as you move through it, and then you feel wiser as a result of that, and you feel stronger as a result of that, now it feels like something that didn't diminish me. It feels like something that guided me forward in my life. Now, we never want to grow because of trauma. That's not a preferable way to grow. But once we have it, that's our responsibility to work through it until we feel stronger and wiser, till we understand ourselves better as a result of it. Now, a lot of people, narrative therapists, think that's enough to resolve trauma. Well, some of the time it's not. Some of the times you still have habits of reactivity. The example I give in a book is this guy cheated on his wife for a year, and then she discovered it and it just rewired her. And so they did the first stages. They could talk about it, and then they both had a story where they were beginning to love each other again. But every once in a while, she'd see somebody cheating on TV or something, and man, she'd have rage. She'd want to attack him. So she readjusted the story. She could talk about the event, but she had this habit of emotional arousal and impulse to attack. And so she needed to literally cultivate different states of consciousness. And this is one of the reasons why the stage system is important. Because in the first stage, you want to examine the event and go deeper into the meanings of the event. But in this stage, I just have a bad habit of getting pissed off and wanting to attack. I want to create a good habit. And so what she needed to learn is, okay, when I feel that surge of rage, don't go into the story about how he cheated on me. Go into the fact of, I don't want to have surges of rage. He's done his work. He's doing what it takes. I feel loving and trusting with him now in a way that I didn't before. I need to cultivate a sense of gratitude for my life. And so she focuses, when the rage comes, to focus on a sense of gratitude. And eventually your unconscious will take over and will generate that sense of gratitude for you. That's the third stage. You learn how to cultivate different states of consciousness. Who's really good with that? The heart math people are really good with cultivating different states of consciousness. And pretty much all the contemplative techniques, which is what, by the way, which is one of the problems that Buddhism had. Buddhism thought, well, you could just do this and get rid of all kinds of problems. No, you really can't, because you have to do those other stages. You have to understand how you've been affected. You have to work into the narrative of your life. You need to develop a self to be able to let go of a self. That's the third stage of trauma work. And then you're feeling pretty good, but that's still not enough. Why? Because life is complicated and it still keeps on throwing us problems. And so we need to develop a witness, a wise self that is observing us with compassion and notices when, I'm beginning to be sensitized in this area. I wonder what that's about. I think maybe I need to do stage 1. I need to talk about something that was distressing to me, or I need to do stage 2 and readjust my story, or do stage 3 and cultivate other steps. So that cultivating that wise self, that witness, all the contemplative practices involve this. And if you look at psychopathology, which, of course, if you're a therapist, you look at psychopathology, all the time. In fact, we looked at psychopathology a little bit too much in the 20th century, if you ask me, but it still exists. Psychopathology always involves a blind spot, particularly personality disorders. For instance, let's take borderline personality disorder, everybody's favorite. Narcissism, borderline, everybody thinks is. So in borderline personality disorder, you think someone's the greatest, then you think they're the devil, and you think you're the greatest, and you think you're worthless. Okay, just going back and forth like that. It's characteristic of that disorder. That's a stable psychological trait in somebody with that disorder. That's part of their personality. They can't do anything else. They have to do that. But they can't observe themselves doing that. Okay. So somebody like that is wise enough to come into treatment. Part of what you do is, you're not observing yourself go, I'm the greatest, he's the greatest, he's the devil, I'm the greatest, I'm worthless. You're not observing yourself doing that. Okay. You're just doing it and acting as if that's the world. So let me teach you a meditation technique to learn how to do it. Now it gets all complicated. I mean, some people, you teach them a meditation technique and they go, I can't stand that. I can't stand that inner focus. So you have to then go take a whole big step back and do something else. I mean, things are simple, but things are complex. Ultimately, what you want is a compassionate witness observing you, noticing when something's going on that doesn't work, and then doing something about it. Remember earlier we talked about nervous systems extending? Well, that's me noticing that this other person is saying you're doing it again, and me noticing my resistance to receiving that, but receiving it, but then saying no, receive it. Now there has to be a wise self noticing me resist it, and a wise self saying, you know what to do, receive it rather than resist it. That wise self is supported by contemplative practice, by meditation, by prayer. Okay? And that's God in the first, second, and third person, but it's also that compassionate witness, that wise self. I personally think that the wise self comes online when we're 3 or 4 years old. I think human brains are so complex that they basically integrate. Now, if you look at the electrical field generated by a human brain, it basically is coherent right to the edge of chaos. If you're, in chaos theory, complexity theory, all the cool stuff happens right between order and chaos. Okay, that's where novelty arises. Well, I think around 3 or 4 years old, a wise self is constellated in every human being. And it's there to some extent. And this is why we can hear 3 and 4 year olds say cool things. Like, a 4 year old say, well, everybody should just love each other all the time. Okay, that's not random. That's that child's wise self noticing that.
Hmm.
You can take a 3 or 4 year old and put them around somebody that's acting badly, and putting around somebody who's acting well, and they won't like the person acting badly. Okay, that's their wise self. They're emotional, communicating them emotionally. Now that can be distorted in that stuff, and that wise self can be supported or repressed by culture, and it is both supported and repressed by culture. But eventually, we want to continue to develop that, so that becomes our ultimate moral authority. Now, that's very important because all of us have at least 6 moral foundations where we develop moral systems that operate that we develop in stages. I mean, and so that wise self helps us with that developmental process, that moral process, which is ongoing and never stops. Now, that's a beautiful thing, but also it's a challenging thing. And so that's being a human being. It's beautiful and challenging.
Keith, that's fabulous. All right, I'm going to open this up for questions. Anybody have any questions for Keith? Because we're kind of running out of time here, but if you have a question for Keith, I wanted to be able to jump in and ask. Really?
Anybody?
If you could share just a little bit about the meditation technique that I imagine there are many different ones for many different people, but you could just give us a little window into that.
Sure, I'd love to. I wrote a book called The Attuned Family.
The what?
The Attuned Family. Attuned, Attune, family. And I wrote that book after I'd studied neurobiology for 3 years. Because one thing that stood out to me, there is a basic process that is universal to developing the witness and to contemplative practice, and I call it attunement. And it's very straightforward. I mean, we won't do the whole thing, but if you're aware of your breath right now, going in and out of your belly, we want to breathe through our belly. So you can be aware of your breath and be aware of the sensation in your body with acceptance and caring intent. Okay? So I'm aware of sensation. So now that sensation is associated with an emotion or many emotions. So now I'm aware of emotions with acceptance and caring intent. Oh, I also have thoughts flickering in and out like bats or butterflies. Okay, well, I'm aware of my thoughts with acceptance and caring intent. Oh, I have judgments. I have judgments about me. I have judgments about you. I have judgments about insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. Oh, let's be aware of our judgments with acceptance and caring intent. Oh, I also have desires. I think I want to sip a tea. Let's be aware of our desires with acceptance and caring intent. This basic attunement practice, if you practice it, which you can anytime, you can do it sitting, you can do it driving, you can do it talking to me, will cultivate the witness, the wise self. Being aware of sensation, emotion, thought, judgment, and desire with acceptance and caring intent. And all of the techniques have it. All the guided imagery has it. This is the core. And that's why I did the Attuned Family, because when couples are doing this with each other and with themselves and each other and with their children, those families do well. Now, there's a million other things that make for a great couple and a great family. But if you start with attunement, we want to be an attuned family, and it comes from mom and dad. That's structural family therapy right there. Things are going to go well. Okay. So there you go. There's a practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith, I know we're short on time. This is very informative, very timely for me. I'm I'm going through a 12-step program, and if
Oh.
anybody's familiar with it all, step 9 is the making amends.
Yes.
And to me, I'm now calling it the making of a lot of trauma over and over again.
Oh no.
And develop. And it's just happened that way. It's just been really hard to get through. And but I'm kind of witnessing it, and through the whole steps, there's the prayer and the meditation part of it. So step program actually kind of is a way for this attunement a little bit for
Exactly.
me. And I just realized it now as we're getting to that step, and how much, because you have those traumas that you have that reaction to, and you can't figure out why. But I'm starting to really figure out why over and over again. So, but thank you.
Well, first of all, that's wonderful. You're doing the 12 steps. And you notice the first 4 steps in the first 3 steps in 12 steps is about, getting sober. But all the other ones are about character and spirituality. And when you get to the 9th step, remember, a central part of the 9th step is, I make amends if it's not going to cause harm. Okay. Now, if it's going to cause harm, then I still need to heal that in me, but I can't go to the other person to do it because it will cause harm. I need to do it with someone else, with my sponsor, with a therapist, with somebody else. And the 9th step is a big deal because there'll be blocks that involve shame, distress, and all that other stuff, trauma. And so you do it. And if you can, you make amends to another person, which is beautiful when they receive it. And if they can't receive it, if it would cause harm, then you do it with other people. And then you move on to the other steps, which is continuing to do your practice, continuing to have a contemplative sense, and continuing to spread the energy that you've discovered into the world, which is AA's great gift. It's a spiritual program. Carl Jung wrote to Bill Wilson, and he said, I get that this is a spiritual program. He said, I would talk about that spirituality more in Europe, but they'd all give me such shit I can't do it, which I thought was really a funny thing. But those guys knew each other because they were kindred spirits. They knew what they were doing. It's quite beautiful. So congratulations. I'm glad you're in the program. I'm glad you're doing step 9.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more? One more question. If anybody has one. Keith, thank you. God bless you. I love you. Look at that face. You just want to squeeze that face. He is so adorable. All right. I hope you guys can I just think the world of Keith. Thank you, Keith, for giving us this time today, and really just for all the work that you do in the world for all of us.
Wonderful.
I just love and appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, much love to everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks. It was a privilege to be on this show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Keith. Have a great day.
How can it not be great after this?
Absolutely.
Bye-bye, you guys.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you guys for being on the call today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.